you're not watching it. I did it in my head.
No mai haere mai, and welcome to this discussion on preventing violence against women. A forum proudly presented by Te Rahi Wahine and Tāmaki Makaurau for Women's Centre. My name is Catherine McAlpine and I'm the Chief Resident Centre. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, for offering your time and your emotional labour to be here for a topic that many would prefer to avoid or pretend it's not happening. It's so important that we lift the cover on this embedded disaster and learn together how to undo the structures and assumptions that enable it to continue. Thanks to the wisdom and creativity of our amazing panellists, I believe that we will all be uplifted with hope and light tonight, that we will go away feeling that prevention is possible and within our reach. I look forward to hearing how we can all play our part to lift the burden of violence from women, from families, and from everyone in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We are in the safe hands of Stacey Morrison, our wonderful chair. Thank you, Stacey, for leading our community forums with such warmth and assurance. I hand over to you now, and I thank you again for your guidance in making this evening safe and positive for us all. Te papa e takoto nei, tēnā koe. O tira tātou katoa e hui mai nei, tēnei, te mihi a tēnā kau ki a koutou. Ka tuahua hau ki te mana whenua o tēnei takiwā, o tira ki ngā mana nui o tēnei wāhi tāmaki ma koutou. Nau mai, whakapiri mai. Tēnā koe, thank you so much for thinking so deeply about what it means for you all and for us all to be here tonight. So as we come together, I just recognise all of the energy it takes to be here, all of the memories, the feelings, the reasons that bring us here tonight. E mihi ana ki ngā wairua e rere nei, ka karanga hia pā I tēnei pō. So just thinking of everyone's presence that brings you here today. So a way that we ensure the safety that we've been talking about and your knowledge that your presence is appreciated, it is respected and honoured. We start with karakia, an incantation recognising particularly that we bring our energy here tonight. So all of your feelings are safe, all of your emotions and sharings are safe. Tēnā tātou. Mai e te tikua, mai e te kawhito, mai e te kāhui ngāri. Mai e tāwhiwhi atu ki ngā atua. Tēnei te tāpai atu nei ki a koutou. E ngā atua wāhine o te wāhina ro. Haramaira, haramaira. Whakaruru hau e te runga e hui nei. Tūtawa mai runga, tūtawa mai ro. Tūtawa mai ro tō, tūtawa mai wa. Kia tau e, te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa. Haumi e, hui e. Thank you again so much for coming tonight, and I'd like to help the two people who I see out of the corner of my eye and try to speak a little bit more slowly, and that is Melody and Taryn. Tēnā kōrua, tēnā koutou, te hunga turi, e mātaki maina, e whakarongo maina, and to everyone who's joining us online. Kia ora koe katoa. I hope the jammies are nice and comfy. You're kind of awesome with your decision making. We have an amazing treat and opportunity tonight. So we have our speakers who have joined us. We will also have some panel time where you can ask questions. We also have kai. We also have time to share our feelings together. So really, it's just the ultimate Wednesday night. For Stacey Morrison Tōpinwa, my name is Stacey, no Ngaitahu ahau, no Te Aroa Hoki, no Te taho tōku whaia no Ngāti Pākehā, Hoki Ahau. So just recognising that I'm from Ngaitahu, and we're in the Pounamu to prove it, Te Aroa, and also to my mother, whose spirit I think of tonight particularly as well. So thank you for the kaupapa that brings us here today, to all of you in this room, because we have some amazing speakers, and I hope that we also have some amazing thoughts provoked tonight. No re tuatahi nei, I'd like to welcome to the stage our speakers. You may have noticed that Nicola Gavy's not here tonight. She wasn't able to be with here, but one incredible person has stepped up and said, I can do this. So did anyone feel today that they thought, I can do this? One of us did. So Mina, thank you so much. I know you're going to be completely qualified for this, because if I tell you about Mina, gender and power have always been an area of interest for Mina. As part of her past role as a support worker with victim support, she has some experiences working with those subjected to gendered violence and abuse. Currently, Mina is a doctoral candidate for the clinical psychology program at the University of Auckland. Her doctoral thesis is on young women's experiences of coercive control within current or past intimate relationships. No reira, tēnā koe, ka pati te tai, ka pao te tōrea, when the tide goes out, the oyster catcher strikes. E pao, tōrea.
And thank you, Leonie, and the team at the Auckland Women's Centre for organising this event. So although I'll be reading off from Nicola's script, I thought it might be good to very, very briefly introduce myself. So, kia ora tātou, rokoia hoki o ko tīpuna, I whānau mai o I Korea, I tūpake o I Korea me tamaki ko Korea ki tokonga. So hello everyone, my ancestors are from South Korea. I was born there and grew up in Auckland from around when I was 12. So that's enough about me. So unfortunately I'm not Nicola, but Professor Nicola Gavy supervises my doctoral thesis, and she supervised my master's thesis as well. So knowing how amazing and insightful she is, it's really a shame that she can't be here today. So I'll be reading the script that she has prepared for this talk. So it might be a little weird at times, you'll find out soon. So please bear with me. So if it helps, please feel free to imagine me as Nicola. So here it goes. Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you everyone for coming out this evening, and my apologies for not being able to be here at the last minute. So it is an honor, even from a distance, to be sharing this platform alongside Meg Brown, Sarah Brown, and my colleague Kristen. And my huge thanks to Mina for presenting this. So two overarching questions we can ask to speak to tonight are, so what drives violence against women? And how can we prevent violence against women? So I would like to preface my thoughts with a comment about my own positionality and how I approach these questions as a Pākehā descendant of colonial settlers from England, Guernsey Island, and Scotland, and as an academic and researcher who works primarily within critical and feminist traditions within Western knowledge systems. So through kōrero with Māori colleagues and reading and listening to Māori scholars and practitioners, I'm increasingly learning that there are fundamentally different ways of understanding issues related to sexual violence, whānau violence, and family violence in Aotearoa. So I want to start by recognizing this and acknowledging that for Māori, the primary drivers are different than they are for Pākehā. In terms of the causal violence of colonization, and also the solutions are different in drawing on Motuara Māori. And that this will be different for Pacifica and for other Tohu groups too, in different ways. So it is important for me to situate my thoughts in relation to recognizing the inspiring mahi that is being done within Māori communities and by Māori scholars and practitioners. So that speaks to these questions, but using different language and frameworks and approaches than I do. And recognizing other amazing work, like what Matt Brown and Sarah Brown are doing, working with Pacifica and Māori. So with that strong caveat that I don't claim to offer a universal perspective, I thank the Auckland Women's Centre for being bold enough to call a meeting on a subject of violence against women. In New Zealand, it is a provocative and deceptively radical move to address the problem in these terms. For too long, our nation discourse has been gender neutral, which helps to obscure where the greatest burden of harm lies and where it comes from. So not all forms of interpersonal violence are perpetrated by men and target women, and not all groups of women have the same likelihood of being violated and abused by men. But the data are clear that women and girls across all parts of society suffer specifically gendered forms of violence because they are women. Something has to be going on that explains these gendered patterns of exploitations, abuse, and violence. So what do I think causes men's violence against women? We all know it is a huge, complex global problem, and we can only scratch the surface here. In these few minutes, I'm just going to say what I think, focusing on what's top of my mind at the moment. And for this evening, I'll speak specifically to what I think causes Pākehā men's violence against women, not to say that this doesn't apply at all for other women, but that it is a bigger and more complicated picture, and not for me to answer alone. So it seems obvious to me that the key driver is a patriarchal social order. So if we break this down into things we can see manifesting around us, things that we can try to tackle, there are three key interrelated elements that I think help to create the conditions of possibility for Pākehā men's violence against women. So one is a strict arrangement of society according to a binary concept of gender. So that is the idea that there are two genders that are considered to have different essential and complementary characteristics. And these are actively produced in formal and informal ways through societal structures, cultural norms, and values. So secondly, in a patriarchal world, not only is gender produced as a binary, you're either a man or woman, and you must behave in particular ways accordingly. But the categories of male and female, and man and woman, and masculinity and femininity exist on a hierarchy. So maleness, men, and masculinity are on top, and femaleness, women, and femininity are underneath. In this hierarchy, men are held to be more important and implicitly superior to women. They're stronger, more authoritative, they're just better. This is, of course, racialized, so that within the category of men, some groups are regarded as more important than others. So the third element, alongside the taken for granted of binary hierarchy of gender, is the specific nature of the social and cultural requirements of men and masculinity. For men, power, control, and dominance are all normalized and naturalized to varying degrees. Hand in hand with the privileges men are accorded in a patriarchal society, they are expected to conform to some quite restrictive rules of masculinity. Men are expected to reject any myth of femininity, the idea that real men are not weak, they don't feel vulnerable emotions like sadness or fear or jealousy, they're not dependent on other people, and the list goes on. There are many problems with these limiting social and cultural rules for men, both for the well-being of men and because of what this can turn into in a social context that tells men both that they must be real men and that they exist in a hierarchical relationship to women as naturally superior. So of course, this creates a psychological impossibility for men. It is not humanly possible not to feel vulnerable. And it's not humanly possible to not be dependent on other people. So following the American philosopher Deborah Berghofen, I call this the myth of masculinity, because no man can live up to those idealized norms of masculinity as strong, invulnerable, and invincible. I don't think all men are invested in the myth of masculinity, but for those who are, any threat to their sense of masculine entitlement and dominance, and any threat to expose their vulnerability becomes potentially dangerous. This is where I find a feminist psychodynamic approach valuable for making sense of the psychological dynamics that arise for men, but are so tightly wed to masculinity rules that they can't accept their own feelings of vulnerability. So this theory suggests that a man like this is likely to project those characteristics he can't accept in himself onto the women around him, and maybe women in general. Seeing women as weak and inferior as a way of bolstering his own feelings of power and dominance. Not only this, but according to this theory, such men will act in ways to enforce weakness and vulnerability onto women. And acting abusively, controllingly, and violently is one way to do this. So this is why it is so important to reject dominant masculinity rules about what real men should be like, and encourage less rigid gender norms, and especially make space for boys and men to accept that it's okay and just human to experience vulnerable emotions. Otherwise, it sets up a psychological impossibility for men that has potentially toxic outcomes. The other essential component of this approach is recognizing that the reason this psychological dynamic can have such potential toxic, misogynist, and violent outcomes is that men occupy a position of relative privilege and power within the patriarchal social order that naturalizes their dominance and superiority. So in terms of the question of how we can prevent violence against women, again, obviously this is a complex challenge that requires multiple kinds of approaches. But in addressing the drivers I've identified, I think it's essential that we work towards the big picture. Overthrowing patriarchy, promoting gender equality, and I think refusing and resisting a rigid binary approach to gender. And more specifically, working to disrupt dominant norms for men and masculinity that holds up the image of the stoical, strong and real men. So there are lots of concrete things we can do towards dismantling these toxic patriarchal social arrangements. Just one of these things we have been trialing is a way of working with boys and young men that open up space for them to observe, reflect on, and critique the rigid hierarchical norms for men and masculinity that they are expected to live up to. And thankfully Chris here is tonight to speak about that work, the Shifting the Line project. So I'm going to leave that hopefully more uplifting side of things to him. Now maybe.
Somehow you did manage to be uplifting still. Just in naming what we're dealing with, and so cleverly, to the extent that I think personally I'm like, okay, I need a minute with that, expressing the whānui, the breadth of the kaupapa that we're looking at. So we have all of tonight to do this together. We will have our speakers, we'll have a panel discussion, we'll have a time for questions and answers as well. So there was a nice little segue that I won't lose the momentum on to Chris Taylor. So Chris's previous work sought to turn a critical eye towards pornography viewership and the concept of pornography addiction. But now when we speak to what Mina mentioned, Shifting the Line, this is a different project. From late 2017 to early 2018, the Shifting the Line team piloted a project that worked with secondary school age boys and young men, encouraging recognition and critique of peer group tolerance for sexual harassment and abuse. So to investigate its fuller potential to foster lasting positive change, the team at Shifting the Line are currently examining the impact of adding a longitudinal framework to their model, which will help to gauge lasting impacts, including the potential for transformative change at the individual level, also within peer networks and more broadly. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi nui, kia koe Chris Taylor.
Kia ora koutou. I'm going to wander around a little bit so I can see my slides. Ko Chris Taylor, aho. So nice to see so many of you here tonight. Thanks to the Auckland Women's Centre for putting this on and for inviting me to be part of it. I am so stoked to follow Nicola because Nicola said a lot of the hard things that I think are often difficult to say. And that sort of language, I think we find is often not raised in environments where violence is the subject of discussion. We often tend to, I think, what's the word, sterilize it and make it nice and palatable. But I think that naming patriarchy, power, and issues of ethnicity are particularly important. And I think something that jumped out to me this morning, I was looking at the Auckland Women's Centre's Facebook page, and they posted a great story on News Hub, and I just want to read a quote from it, which I think is important. I'm Pākehā, cis male, heterosexual, and I think it's important to note that in government policy and in a lot of institutional settings, there's a tendency to shy away from pointing to this group that I belong to as a predominant user of violence. In fact, the group that commits the most violence in this country. And this is a quote from this article by Carrie Leonetti, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, which I think speaks a little bit to this before I get into the talk. The quote is, there are still a lot of deeply entrenched cultural stereotypes about family and sexual violence perpetrators. They are poor, brown, drunk, disruptive, and obviously dangerous. Many perpetrators are none of these things. They are white, well-educated, charming, and manipulative. And I think this is something that we want to speak to in our project, which is that we're not working with what might be termed at-risk youth or youth who have necessarily been exposed to violence from violent homes. We're trying to find a way to engage those boys who are from environments that were perhaps a bit like mine, not violent, loving families, who still go out and commit violence. So, we piloted this project Shifting the Line in a couple of high schools in 2017 and 2018. Myself, Nicola Gailey, Jada Bryce, Octavia Coldador, and a whole lot of other collaborators and research assistants. and without them, the project wouldn't have worked. I'd like to also shout out NetSafe, the Marsden Fund, and the Whatenga Fellowship for continuing funding this work. The sparks for this project arose in two key areas, although it's more broad than that. The first is a study that we were running with 16 and 17-year-old girls on the dynamics of what is sometimes called sexting, or can be called online image-based sexual abuse. What we found in that study is that the young girls that we spoke to were describing a tightrope that they had to walk between messages from adults about just don't do it, don't send nudes, and that sort of thing, and a whole lot of peer pressure, particularly pressure from boys to still send those nudes. And it got us thinking, and actually some of the young women we work with mention this, is that if we want to intervene in this kind of behaviour, it stands to reason, and it seems quite common sense, to actually address the boys who are doing the pressuring. And the second strand to this work, which kind of ran alongside this, but stands in the long shadow of the Roastbusters case, were media reports of young men behaving badly, I don't think that's very good phrasing, behaving in sexist ways, harassing women, and acting in misogynistic ways. But what we did notice as well is that there were young men who were not tolerating this, young men who were taking a stand. Here's an example of the 2007 Wellington College Facebook communication scandal that erupted. It's worth noting that this is not a one-off incident. As I said, Roastbusters is a big case, but obviously there was also the Christchurch High School survey. Was that last year or the year before? So this is an ongoing Indian issue in schools. What we noticed about the Wellington College protests that were mostly organised by girls and young women was that while the protests were mostly attended by girls and young women, there were a couple of young men who were attending very visibly, standing alongside their peers and making their voices heard. In fact, there's a boy in the bottom left-hand corner wearing a Wellington blazer, a Wellington College blazer. And it really got us thinking again. I mean, I think Sarah and Matt and we were just speaking about this while we were having some kai, which is that some of these solutions actually just stare you in the face. Like when you look at it and you're kind of like, okay, well these boys aren't into this. Is there a way that we can harness their energy? Is there a way that we can support these boys? Are there ways that we can get some reflection and some thought going on in here to use this to positive end? So our original problem formulation, we were originally funded by NetSafe, was focusing mainly on sexting. We realised that you can't address sexting and online image abuse and online sharing of nudes if you don't address issues of sexism and gender equality in the beginning, because those are the foundations of that behaviour. We wanted to address the taken for grantedness of dominant norms of masculinity that Nicola spoke by Mina so elegantly described, as well as a lack of space, both physical and social space, for boys to get together and to engage with one another in an open and honest way. Boys, at least in my peer network growing up, never spoke about feelings, didn't connect with each other about any deep topics, and there was a lot of banter and a lot of teasing. And the other one was, the other factor was barriers to ethical resistance and bystander intervention. So the peer cultures, the ways that peer cultures of boys tend to create environments that are resistant to standing out. When you're a teenage boy, you want to fit in. You don't want to stand out. I'm not going to talk about this. This is all kind of waffly academic theory and methodology stuff. And this is normally a 2-hour lecture, but I won't bore you with that. But one of the things that I wanted to point out is that we use this thing which is called a problem-posing methodology, which is quite a simple idea. We essentially offered a series of prompts to boys. Instead of going in and delivering a lecture on the content that we wanted to cover, we gave them prompts that would spur provocative conversation, and then we would let them discuss the complexity of those issues amongst themselves. Core to this was creating an environment where the boys felt safe, where they felt like they could talk to each other, and that they felt supported. we sort of approached the project with the idea that they are the experts in what it's like to be a 15-year-old boy. We got kind of fed up, and I know that the boys that we talked to get a bit fed up with people talking about what it's like to be a 15-year-old boy without actually talking to any 15-year-olds. And so that was really important to say, you are the expert in what it's like to be a 15-year-old boy. Why don't you tell us what the issues are that you're facing? So we ran an initial workshop. We had it's relatively small, 53 boys in 2 schools, one a high decile school, one a low decile school, and a recent school leaver organisation. We worked with 10 groups. We should say that it was a self-selected sample, but I'll talk a little bit more about the future work that we're planning on doing in this area. I would normally have a video here, but because of time, I'm not going to play it, but I'll briefly describe what some prompts that we worked with look like. So problem posing in practice looks like relatively straightforward and easy to engage with prompts about sexism, gender, harassment, and that sort of thing. One of the first exercises that we get the boys to do is to have a pink piece of paper and a blue piece of paper, and we get them to write down on the blue piece of paper, what do you think is expected of you as a boy, and on the pink piece of paper to write down, what are you not allowed to do as a boy. And they go around and write it, and we get them to share those ideas. And it works so well as an icebreaker, because what the boys realise in that room is that they're all trapped within the same set of rules about the things that they're expected to do. And unfortunately, just as when I was a teenage boy, the rules haven't changed. It was be strong, be emotionally stoic, don't cry, be in control, make money, all of those sorts of things. And the things that they weren't allowed to do really broke my heart. They were saying, I'm not allowed to watch the television shows that I enjoy to watch or I'll be teased, or I'm not allowed to like particular music. I'm not allowed to wear the clothes that I would like to wear. I'm not allowed to do these really ordinary things that would make me happy, but I'm sort of trapped. So we treated the boys as masculinity experts, and we wanted to start to unpack these assumptions. Then we go through with hypothetical scenarios, examples from news headlines, videos of men talking about, full-grown men talking about their experiences of masculinity. The video that I was going to show you is one of a group of men trying to define what it means to be a man and essentially being lost for words, or laughing, or sighing, or looking confused. And I think that those very simple ways of intervening actually work really well. Here is, these are a couple of panels from our Instagram. I'm going to do a shameless plug in one slide, so be ready for that. We used these prompts, and in doing so, we found that the boys could create critiques, sensitive, thoughtful commentary on a lot of the same issues of sexism that gender advocates, academics, and others have been making for a really long time. They are critical, they are critical thinkers, they are sensitive, and they are creative. And if they are given the space to do it and to explore these ideas, I ran the majority of the workshops. I left feeling very optimistic about the boys that we worked with, at least. We've just finished 30 key informant interviews with people working in NGOs, academia, government, education, and elsewhere. These interviews and our previous experience are going to run into our workshop models, which will be running in the next few months in some Auckland schools. And the idea is to extend that model, address some more contemporary issues. I know some of you probably have burning questions about Andrew Tate, that sort of thing, and make it contemporary and interesting for the boys and do it over a longer period of time, which I think is crucial. I think this should be the last slide. Here's the shameless plug. If you have, this is, as I said, normally a 2-hour lecture. Normally, I will go into a lot more detail about the methods, who we work with, and everything else, but we have a full report that's on our website, which is shiftinginline.ac.nz, and we have an Instagram page, and the Instagram page is a really amazing intervention in itself, because it is almost entirely covered in quotes from the boys themselves. And you'll read on that some of the commentaries that have the observations, the criticisms, and so on. I like to go back and read it. all the time. We also had some students make some TikTok videos for us that synthesized the report down to tasty 1-minute sections, so if you don't have a long attention span, you can also watch those. Thanks so much everyone for listening, and I look forward to all the questions. I hope you have a lot.
Kia ora, Chris, and particularly as the mama of a 16-year-old man, thank you for all of those insights and like you say, the opportunities to look a little deeper and also to be optimistic about the change that can be enacted, because that's what tonight is about. It's about prevention. And I just want to acknowledge that Rihi Te Nana wasn't able to make it tonight. She had a last-minute urgent matter. But I did want to pick up what we're talking about with cultural framing and understanding as a wahine Māori. Who knows the story about Mataora and Niwareka? Kia ora kōrua. So Mataora, what do we understand Mataora to be? Full face moko on men. Ne? But that is actually wrapped in a story of domestic violence. So Mataora and Niwareka lived together in this part of the world, but Niwareka came from Rarohinga. In Rarohinga, there was no such thing as domestic violence. So as our kōrero goes, of course, when she was struck by Mataora, she was shocked and she was not willing to stay. And so she went back to Rarohinga. And Mataora, having his moko, was actually a reminder of the fact that it was not okay to be violent against Niwareka. So within our narratives, within our ancient kōrero, there is this deep value that tells us he utu, tō te rā mahi, there is a price, and that it is not the behaviour that is part of our deepest tikanga. So Mataora, Niwareka, right from our very ancient stories, just want to recognise and appreciate what you say about colonisation, because in our most ancient ways of being, that is not us. And there are many examples of how that is not the way that Māori lived and at our very core values, our mātāpono. We don't actually talk about that a lot, and Mataora has taken another place, and I recognise that, and also we don't need to stay in exactly the same place, but that is our origins, and many of our stories tell us our deepest values. So we've talked on an academic level, and it's been amazing, and as I say, I'm still ruminating. The tea is still sitting in there in my teapot, but we have this opportunity now to speak to someone or hear from somebody who shares so generously their real life experience. Taimelelangi Mataio Whaketai Matt Brown is a New Zealand-born Samoan author and renowned communicator who works to eradicate domestic violence by supporting those who perpetrate violence to heal. A survivor of family violence and childhood sexual abuse himself, he originally started his domestic violence advocacy work by sharing his story with the men who frequented his busy barbershops as a way to foster vulnerability, healing and connection. And I know you will update us on that part of the story now, but having been in that space, it was immediately a game changer. And I'm sure that that still is something that you carry with you, all of those echoes of words of the people and the men that you've shared stories with. But now, for over a decade, Matt has hosted free men's anti-violence support groups from locations like barbershops, construction sites, gang pads, prisons, and in Indigenous spaces. He's facilitated multiple programs inside men's and youth prisons and has been recognised with an NZM as a result as well. And now, because this appears to be his destiny, that he will speak to us with his wonderful wife, Sarah, as well. about he has dedicated even more time to this. Nō reira, e te tūnga ne nau mai, piki mai ki tēnei pai kōrero. Nick Brown.
Phoenix Stacey Morrison, A-Town represent. Talofa lava, aina, tēnā koutou katoa, o lo ingo o Te Manalangi, ngā te rofa ki Te Mali Paul Brown. Growing up in the further south of this whenua, of this nation, you know, not many people look like me, so not many people could pronounce my name, and so Nat Brown stuck. I was born up here in Tamaki Makaurau. My parents come from the beautiful island of Samoa, Sakpalingi and Wharelakei to be exact. I was born in Mangere, so South Auckland represent, but I was raised down in the cold Otutahi, South Island of New Zealand, Aotearoa. And so, who are we? She is not your idiot, is a whānau, is a aina, it's me and my best friend, the love of my life, Sarah. And pictured here we have our beautiful children and my dear mother, who I stand on her shoulders with this kaupapa, and my brothers. Here we have some extra letters on our name that Her late Majesty granted us, but I suppose I took it just to into some spaces that I couldn't really enter in with my looking like this. But yeah, my story starts from a young child who was born into an environment that I would describe with one word, that word being unsafe. Pictured here's a picture of me as a 5-year-old boy, and a recent picture of me. I struggle to look at this photo because, although I'm smiling, my eyes tell a different story. You see, you never, ever forget the feeling of another man's private parts on your body at the age of 3. To then watch him leave your body and do the same to your little brother was traumatic. You see, when the infamous movie Once the Warriors came out, my siblings and I was 10 years old. We sat on the fala and watched it, and we laughed through the entire film. Because we will compare Bepeke's black eyes to my mum's black eyes. Like, now, Bepeke's got nothing on mum's black eyes. Because she will go to church like that. Bruised face, big sunglasses, yet no one said or did anything. This was our environment. And the way we survived was we would laugh at it. And so this kaupapa begins in a little garden tin shed in a place called Aranui, on the east side of Christchurch, where I decided to cut my boys here in my neighbourhood. And it was from this place, it was from this chair where I soon learned that pain, shame, family violence did not discriminate. No matter what colour skin you were, what background, what ethnicity you were, or where you sat on the wealth chain. Because when the men would come and trust me with their hair, they soon trusted me with their stories. And if you told me that one day I would have the busiest barbershop in all of Aotearoa, I would never believe you. I would never believe you because my upbringing, dreams were a distant reality. For most of us Polynesians growing up in the South Island, where not many people look like us, our superheroes were the All Blacks. Unfortunately for me, my country club was KFC, so that didn't sit well. But I grew up around hip hop. Hip hop was one of my saving graces, and so I fell in love with the fashion of hip hop. And so barbering naturally came watching these movies of Black Americans talking and about anything in the barbershop. And so from this space, this kaupapa, our work, talking to me, every day, I soon learned that we are more alike than we are different. We are more alike than we are different. And so working with men over the last 15 years has been the honour of my life. It's been freaking hard, annoying sometimes, but beautiful most times. And so, our government, NSD, to be exact, approached my wife, and they said they wanted to collaborate with us, work with us. My initial response was, hell no, I'm going to lose my street crew. But they had some boots here, so I thought, okay, sweet, I'll use that. But we wanted to run these barber events we named it Barber Hui. These wānanga where, I just thought, I'm just one barber. There's only so many men that consider much hair that I can cut. We need to teach other barbers on this whenua how to hold these spaces. And so we ran these wānanga. And we ran 4 around the country, 50 barbers from around the Motu Kei to each wānanga. At this one wānanga, I always share my story quite raw, and then I do an activity called the Circle of Courage. And I asked the barbers, step inside the circle. I'll ask you guys a question. Hands up in this room if you've ever felt misunderstood. Yeah, so majority of us. Okay, so I asked this question, step inside the circle if you've ever felt heartbroken. So the majority of the older barbers stand in the circle, the young guys are outside giggling. And one of the questions I get to find out is, step inside the circle if you've ever been sexually abused. At this one wānanga, 47 barbers stood in that circle. 47 barbers who you will never see on the statistic table because society does not encourage men to be vulnerable. Society does not encourage men to be safe. And when we do share, we're ridiculed, we're humiliated, we're shamed, the list goes on. The shame and pain demands to be felt. And if we choose not to feel them, then they all manifest. And they manifest from this, they manifest from this. You only need to look behind the wire and see how people hurt you. And so, doing this mahi for a while, this platform approached me, TikTok, which is where we launched this profile, but she is not your rehab. I thought to myself, I didn't know what TikTok was, and I YouTubed it, and I said, man, all these people are intellectual researchers, like PhD, like scientists, like what the heck am I going to talk about? But I married a strong wahine from Ngāpuhi Te Rawa who said, you get your ass out there and we'll tell you. And so I did, I practiced and rehearsed, and this is where we launched the Kaupapa She Is Not Your Rehab, which Penguin then approached us, our publisher, and they had a goal to sell books. We had a goal to give books away for free. We wanted to get them to every prison because I was the kid. Every time that Dad did a lag, I was the kid sitting at home, hoping and wishing and dreaming when Dad got out that he would stop hitting the shit out of Mum. Unfortunately, that day never came. And so when we wrote this book, we wanted to put in tools of healing for our men that was easy to understand. No psychobabble, nothing flashy, but just simple words that would connect with my brothers, my cousins, my boys. And so we did. In 2021, Penguin asked us, how many people incarcerated? 9,350 people at the time were incarcerated. And so they said, it's going to cost you guys about $100,000. And so we went knocking on a few people's doors, we raised the money, wifey texted Penguin and said, I got that money, send me an invoice and send me those books. And so every person incarcerated received the book. And the letters that we have received since then have been so freaking beautiful. To hear men who have never read a book, read it 5 times, to receive messages from our wahine saying that this is the first time my husband has apologized. To hear children write to us and saying, I've never seen my dad be so affectionate to Mum. Dad no longer hits Mum. That $10 per person was a worthy investment. And so for us, this our latest project that I'll quickly share with you guys is called Inner Boy. Again, all of our mahi is trying to make healing accessible for our people. Because to see a therapist in my city, you're looking at $150 per session. So my mental health or putting the lights on and feeding my children, but of course, our family. And so our mental health takes a backseat. And so we developed this online tech app called Inner Boy. Inner Boy was birthed as our work that we've been doing for the last 15 years, seeing the victim. I'm a massive upset with some of the hardest and staunchest men in this country, in the darkest places that society's created. And when you can connect with men on a deep level, you soon realize that most people who have perpetrated violence were once upon a time a victim themselves. And so until we can connect with the victim, then we will start to heal the man. And when you heal the man, you then create a cycle breaker. And that's hard. That's hard. And so Inner Boy was birthed. This is inspired by one of my clients, this man here, this gentleman here. When I found out he had cancer, he was diagnosed with cancer, I wrote him a letter. And so this is the heart of our kaupapa. I want to share this letter with you guys. A letter to my dear brother. When you told me that you wished you could tell me everything, but you couldn't possibly, because it would test the limits of my love, my heart was still my brother. So still, so quiet. You see, bro, If I told you, you'll walk away just like everyone else. But if only you knew my uso, then when I think of why I even bother at all, I think of men like you. If only you knew that it's the shame that you push down, there are whispers in your ear telling you I'll leave if I knew. Because of the truth whispered, it will tell you that nothing you could ever tell me will change my mind about you. Because I see you, my uso. And when I see you, I don't see the gangster. I see a little boy sleeping on the bed springs because your father deems you unworthy to sleep on a mattress. I've always seen that. So when I cut your hair, I'm cutting that little boy's hair, and with every snip, I'm telling him he's worthy. You are worthy, little one. Snip, snip. You are worthy of belonging. Snip, snip. You are worthy of healing. Snip, snip. You are worthy to exist. Snip, snip. You are worthy to be loved. You epitomize the reason I do this at all. When you come into the barber shop and sit in my chair, I feel you exhale my uso. I exhale too. And suddenly you are no longer in my barber chair. You are lying on those bed springs, and I'm sitting on the end of the bed with you. I see your tears, but I don't hear them. You weren't allowed to cry back then, but you can cry with me now, little one. I'm honored to hear your tears. Sometimes they just need a witness. So I'll sit there in the dark with you as long as it takes until you have the courage to push them out, my uso. I can smell that you're around. I know it's just your way of trying to protect yourself. I'm sorry you had to stay like that all night. I'm here now, and I promise we'll clean it up together. I ain't going anywhere. It will always be because of men like you, with little boys inside of you, longing to be seen, that I consider this work the honor of my life. To cut your hair and see you beyond what the world sees, well, it's perspective that I too must surely have a each of us. So I'll continue to be my father's brother. I thank you humbly for this gift, my soul. I thank you for allowing me to see you. I thank you for letting me sit with you in all of it. You see, he was a man when he came into my barber shed in Aranui. My community questioned my integrity. Bro, you know the shit this guy's putting on our streets today is destroying our family, it's destroying our communities. But I chose a career path which required me to serve, was to cut hair. And I soon learned of a boy who was introduced to crime at the age of 5. Yelling, "Mom, I'm hungry." Boy jumped in the car, took him down to the closest dairy and said, "You go in there and you grab whatever you want." A boy who walked home after school into his house and witnessed his mom lying there on the couch, overdosed with a needle in her arm. Who was then shipped to his father's house, and his father found him too much, so his father dropped him off at the closest boys' home. And so at the age of 10, my uso was shipped from foster home to foster home. And every foster parent he had sexually abused him. And he tells me of a story where one foster guardian found him too much. So to discipline him, he humiliated him. And what they looked like was he stripped him naked, hung him upside down on the clothing line, got the rest of the boys to stand around in a circle, and as they spun my uso around, they pissed on him. You see, monsters are not born fine. They're not born. They're created from years of systemic failures, systemic racism, trauma, pain, shame, the list goes on. And it's easy for us to point the finger and say, these men need to heal and they need to do the work. But we as a society, it is our responsibility. If it truly takes a village to raise a child, where is that village when our children are suffering behind closed doors? And so Inner Boy was birthed. This is a quick sample of it. Again, it's simplifying our healing tools, the stuff that my wife and I have learned over the last 15 years, asking men hard questions. What do you need, also? What do you need, brother? We don't need any more psychobabble. We want true tools that will connect with us on a deep level, indigenous ways. Corrections psychologists have asked me over the years, what's the secret, what's the blueprint to this co-copper? Because the men who you're working with or coming through the shop who have re-offended for 10 to 20 years are not re-offending. What's the blueprint? And it's simple. It's whakawhanaunga time. It's relationship. It's accompanying people with where they're at, not rolling out how to heal this or what to do. Because all of us are different. Every person is different. And so, making this accessible, you have a video where I talk to you. Inner Boy is 30 minutes for 30 days, making it bite-sizable, approachable tools, insights. This is an activity that we have on there. Forgiveness is when I can put down the gun. I want everyone to look at this image and repeat after me. Forgiveness is when I can put down the gun. Okay, everyone close your eyes. Grab your left hand and put it on. Grab your right hand and put it on your heart. Everyone eyes closed and repeat after me. Forgiveness is when I can put down the gun.
Forgiveness is when I can put down the gun.
You see, for me, forgiveness was when my son was born. This little thing that all he did was cry and shit. But it was love at first sight, and I thought to myself, how on earth would anyone ever want to hurt something so precious? My son was my greatest invitation to do the work. I thought to myself, if I don't heal, all my shit, all my bitterness, my resentment will be transmitted onto him. You see, your childhood trauma is not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. And what you do not transform, you will transmit. So my son invited me to heal the many people who perpetrated violence when I was a kid, to heal the young teenager who sexually abused me at the age of 3, to forgive my father. And when we say forgiveness, for me it was letting go, because harboring and holding that pain would only be transmitted onto my wife and my children. And so I end with this slide, changing the narrative. I stand before you as a man who was born into violence for the first 15 years of my life. I lived and breathed violence. But I'm living proof that it's possible to change the narrative. It's possible to be everything that you never received. It's possible to be the father that you never received. It's possible to be the husband, the partner that you never witnessed growing up. And it's not easy. Healing is not rainbows and butterflies. It's not a buzzword. Healing is freaking crying. It's punching the air. Not your partner, not your children. But it's hard and it's possible. That's what I say to you.
I thank you for your tears, actually, for the heart that you bring to listening to Matt's Kōrero. And now we will please be joined by the love of his life and best friend, beautiful Sarah, who is just going with the flow, because we didn't particularly, didn't particularly give her notice on this one. But look, she can handle anything. So when we start to speak to healing, and also you've talked about structures, you've talked about causes, but this is also about prevention. So when we look at healing and healing perpetrators, Matt and Sarah, I guess if I can start with you. You're asking for aroha, and aroha is not just love, but it's also having compassion. Compassion for people who are perpetrators because they were themselves victims. How do we change our mindset? Because perpetrator being so punitive about it comes very naturally in this society. What are the things that you notice that make a difference? And I'll ask that to all of you. To healing perpetrators who are also victims.
Kia ora. Ko Siri toku ingoa. For us, in our mahi, we really believe that it starts with seeing someone's intrinsic humanity. And when we say that, like what Matt said, monsters are not born, they're created. No child is born a monster. So therefore, things have happened in their life that have caused the violence and the chaos and the perpetration of violence, I guess. And so For us, we truly believe that a way forward is not the punitive approach that we've been doing for decades now in this country. Incarceration simply does not just work. Our statistics show it doesn't. And so a way forward for us is humanity, empathy, whakaparangatanga, really understanding that we must embrace people in their full story and who they are, and understand that their family of origin story is deeply connected to how they're manifesting today.
And that's not to condone, the bad behaviour, the abusive behaviour, but it's just having an understanding. People always ask me, where are you today with your dad? Like, I'm still in a relationship with my dad, and I choose to forgive him, because the truth is my dad is a better grandfather than he was a father, and so for me it's still giving him that hope. He can see his kids, but I learned a thing called boundaries, where it's on my time, when I'm free, that you can see your grandchildren. Because what's the alternative? The other way doesn't work. Shaming, locking them up, throwing away the keys, it doesn't work. Prison is the place where you will find the biggest population of traumatized people. And so hurt people learn better in there how to hurt people. And so we really, whakapanaungatanga requires us to step outside of ourselves. Requires us to serve. A Samoan proverb that I love and I try and live by is o le ala I le pule o le tautua, which means the pathway to leadership is through service. And I think we can all do that. We started with what we had. Some Remington clippers that on the box that said, titanium blades, but that shit touched Polynesian hair, it's blunt. But I started with what I had in a garden shed, and it's organically grown from there.
I'm not sure if I can give lots of wisdom, but I think I was just telling Mateo, that I'm a fan. I read his book. It was amazing. You should all buy like 50 copies and hand it out to everyone, but yeah, I think the other part of what I read from that book is that she is not your rehab. So that part of, yes, victimized in a boy, yes, but it's not on you, partners, child, whoever, to carry that for the person. I think it's really important to remember that.
As I said, we don't work with. I hate that term, at-risk. It's bad. I also hate following Matt and Sarah talking. But I do a lot of work on masculinity work. I've done it for years, and one of the things that you notice about our cultures of men is that men generally very bad at communicating, and it's because they're not taught how to do it. And there's a whole element of shame, and there are elements of safety, the ability to open up, and I think that spans most men. I think that that's a huge burden to a lot of men. And I think that is sort of one of the, when I think about violence prevention, I think we often miss some of the most fundamental and basic elements of what is causal, in my opinion. And one of those causal elements is inability to communicate, inability to open up, and lack of resources to do it.
So how do we change that? How do we change that, disability when it comes to speaking to emotions? And you talk about foundational kind of practices that mean that there's shame in speaking to emotions. How do we change that?
Overthrow the patriarchy. I think it's an issue that everyone working in the area grapples with, which is that you can only make so much change. And what we're really hoping for in all of our modest ways is to create a broader cultural shift. But people doing it from ground can only do so much. It requires top-down changes, it requires cultural changes, political changes, interventions against sexism in work environments, the makeup of boardrooms, all of that sort of stuff. I think we can just do what we can. And I think that that's got to be good enough.
Yeah, and I do agree with a lot of things, and probably, in my opinion, a good starting point would be to say, hey, gender pattern is a thing. Gender pattern is a thing, it exists, and let's look at it. I think that would be a good starting point. I guess, I think Nicola talked about what kind of environment creates the possibility for men to go on and change their trauma into aggression, or I don't know if she said that actually, but I'm saying that. How society is allowing men to shift their trauma into aggression and anger, and allow that to happen, whereas women with trauma is not necessarily going down the same path. So I think we really need to look at what's allowing that difference, and really looking at, what's actually different, what's actually going on here, and sort of looking at all the wider sort of societal issues around gender, hierarchy, and all of those things. So I think it starts from very basic things like, hey, boys, you can cry, those sort of things, on top of, sort of not sexualizing women and all of those things. I think they all combine together, little by little, and come together to create this sort of society.
And Matt, you also spoke about how the stereotype or a perpetrator looks like is brown is poor. Tell us about how that becomes an impacting factor for our men, in a group that is supposedly always doing this, always being a term that is sometimes thrown around.
Yeah, I think because of pop culture, it's been romanticised. Like films like Once Were Warriors, people misinterpret the haka that the All Blacks do as violent or angry. Brown people are angry. It's like that's so far from the truth. And if you actually do your research properly, what you see, talking about Ngāti Ora, even in Samoa, the research from a PhD thesis, Waki knows more about this than I do, she's more qualified than me. Maureen, she did a whole research thesis on this term that we have in Samoa called whianainga. Whianainga was a covenant between the brother and sister. If you had a daughter in your whānau, in your ainga, you were recognised as blessed. And so women were always protected, women were held to a higher esteem because they carried out the next generation. And so brothers would have to follow, if they had a sister, they had to follow her and make sure that she was always protected when she went out. That obviously went to shit when the missionaries came to Samoa, and they seen that and they said, oh, this is blasphemy, like, it should be God first. And when we say God, we're talking about the minister. God first, then the man, then the family, then her. And so that's been domestic violence, and research has shown that's been that manifested. And so it's, for me, to your question before, how do we change this? We have to do this as a community. It's a collective job of healing our communities. If we're going to wait around for people in power, government to change and help us, but you're going to be waiting around forever. But that's the truth. So how I changed in my community was I opened a barber shop and I said, these are the morals of the shop. We would not objectify women. We would not talk bad about other barber shops. Like, this is the culture going forward. And that was hard. Because other barbers were like, bro, why are you talking about this mental health stuff? Like, just stick to cutting here. Shut up. It was hard, but this was I drew the line in the sand. This is what I'm standing for.
I think that's exactly it. We have to create safe spaces. It's all very well to say boys can cry, boys should cry. Where should they cry and who should they cry to? This is the question. What we decided in our community of Ōtutahi was our barbershop would be a safe place. We called it that, we invited people in, we held that space for our tāne, and they willingly came. We've never once run a court-mandated program. Every single week our barbershop was filled to the brim of men wanting to do the work and coming to our group therapy. We're filled to the brim of tāne booking in, asking for solutions for help. So it's simply not true that men don't want to do the work, they do. There just isn't adequate safe spaces for them.
And when we talk about solutions and resources and what it actually looks like, you provided some, so that's your new resource. Do you want to just say again what that is? And just to recognise what sort of intervention and what sort of level of labour that takes in a person. Like, say for instance, when I had children, and all of those things that make you go, this is going to be the change. This is me having a vision for the parent I want to be and the parent I don't want to be, the things that I don't want to pass down to my children. But then when violence has been part of your home, it was shocking to me that there was even a thought or an urge or a reflex to hit a child or my child. So when, when we have those feelings, when we are healing ourselves, what are the resources and the thoughts that can really help?
I think understanding that what was learned in our family of origin can also be unlearned, and we can learn new ways. So I too came from a very dysfunctional whānau. I was adopted out of my original whānau and raised by very strict religious parents. Now, in our home, passive aggressiveness, physical violence, emotional manipulation was very real and just normal. So when I left home at 15 and I came to, start new relationships, I became a teen mother. I suddenly realised that all of those little dysfunctions and all of those abuses that seemed so normal and familiar to me, because that was welded to my first sense of whānau, my first sense of identity, this was now sort of seeping into my life. When I had my daughter, I was 19 years old, and I looked down at her and I looked at her and I thought, no one has ever loved me the way I love her. And actually I thought, that is the biggest invitation to do the work. I will be the mother for you that I've never received myself, and I will take it upon myself to do any amount of work possible. Now, when I started my healing journey, there wasn't the Facebook groups and the resources that we have online. Now we have more resource than ever to do the work. Our job and our desire with our kaupapa is to really make the tools of healing accessible, especially for our people, Pacific and Māori. We want the tools to be easy to understand. We want them accessible for free. We don't believe that should only be available for those that can afford therapy. So for us, I believe that in all places we should be encouraging people with real life solutions and tools. Stop saying to people go to therapy. That's an absolute privilege, and it's one that is not afforded to the most of this population.
I think just to draw it back to like a broader cultural, societal thing, is that from a young age boys are taught to use violence to solve problems, and that's pretty universal, to be competitive and to be violent. And it means that when you're stuck in a situation where you don't know how to deal with it, and the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I think that changing those norms around masculinity generally for most men and giving more tools to them is essential. And I want to just also plug something that we're currently working on. I'm not sure what the shape of it's going to be, but a resource for how to speak with groups of young boys, how to create spaces that they feel comfortable in, and kind of tips. We don't want to give, we've talked about this, we don't want to give a blueprint, we don't want to give a sort of like, this is how you run a workshop kind of resource. What we're going to do is find a way to encourage people to think critically about how they approach boys and young men, and how to create environments that they feel safe and cared for, which is really, I think, quite radical.
I heard your opinion about therapy. I'm training to be good. But I really, if it's out there, it should be available for everyone 24/7, to be honest. But it's not. So make use of any resource you can to access the free ones, free and discounted ones. But I am well aware that it's quite shit. So I'm definitely agreeing on that. But I think there are lots of things that can be done. Sorry, I forgot your name just for like Chris said, for us to have that sort of understanding, critical mindset, to know So to be able to link that, hey, if I sort of enforce these sort of rules of masculinity on my child or their friends or these men I know, that is really, really helpful for the whole society. Then I think you can start changing your own appropriate behaviors, thoughts, and feelings towards better sort of, I guess, environment for yourself. And you recognizing, or someone recognizing, hey, this is abuse, I think is a start. Because sometimes you can't recognize that it is abuse. I think it's a really good start for you to be like, ooh, be surprised. And then actually feel like, oh, I need to change something. Yeah.
Mina, I appreciated how you, Nicola, spoke about colonisation and colonial structures. And I've been in lots of hui where that comes up, and I always like looking at faces and what people feel when that comes up. Because a lot of people, you know, like let's not even dig into Facebook, but we just have to look at the first comment, and there's Graham, and he's saying, oh, of course, it's all colonisation. But if we extrapolate that a little bit, what can we see in terms of the changing of living structures, the changing of values? You also spoke, Matt, to the introduction of missionaries, of religion, and quite a contorted version of, you know, spare the rod, spoil the child. So when we say that about colonisation and colonial structures, what do we mean? Where does the damage, where does it exist, and where has it always existed within that?
I think it's a part of our mahi that we do with the tāne we work with, and predominantly we do work with Indigenous men, is actually not just decolonising, but also re-indigenising, helping them understand that who our identity is as Polynesian, as Māori. Actually, we were once gardeners, we were once nurturers, there's a whole lot of work around that, but I will say that actually it's about re-educating ourselves to our own cultural practices, our own Indigenous ways, our own identity, pre-colonisation, and making that the norm and making that the way that we interact with our tamariki and with our whānau.
What she said.
I don't think I can improve on that.
But how do we address defensiveness? You know, the not all men. Chris, you're obviously relating.
I only relate because actually I saw Matt and Sarah speak at the National Domestic Family Violence Conference, and when I was in our presentation, we had a gentleman at the end who reacted quite badly to the provocation that we were making, which was that men working in environments, particularly environments that deal with violence and environments where, perhaps coming in and being the man and talking down to everyone and mansplaining and all that sort of stuff isn't a very good approach, and that you need to be a bit humble and you need to be careful. And he said, so you mean men just have to do what they're told and follow the herd or something like that. I can't remember what it was. He was not on board at all, but I said to him, come up to me afterwards and have a conversation with me, because I think, maybe I'm stealing a little bit from your playbook, but I mean, that guy clearly feels somehow attacked or ostracized or out of place or defensive, and he feels that way for a reason. And so instead of, initially I was pissed off, but I then thought, okay, well, I actually want to know where he's coming from, why he got to be that way, and perhaps through a conversation with him, you've got to be optimistic, I think. We could start to unpack some of those things. So I don't know, defensiveness is, or some people even need to get through it, unfortunately, but I like to try. And I think it comes with experience in talking about these things as well, to feel comfortable.
Then I remember writing my beautiful thesis last year that although, yes, we live in like a patriarchal society, there is hierarchy, but individual males, it's hard to find someone who actually individually feel powerful in their daily lives. And I think we need to sort of keep reminding ourselves you know, we're talking about, you know, society that, you know, individual men, they go through a lot of things as well. We need to sort of come from a place of understanding, like, yeah.
I think it's also important to remember the words of Bell Hooks, one of our heroes, and she says patriarchal hurts them too. Patriarchal hurts him too. And so we have to come from this place collectively as a society of understanding and seeking to understand rather than just being understood. And I look at my husband for this because he's someone who gets a lot of triggered men coming at him for the title of our book. She is not your rehab. Literally, a dear Pākehā man came into our barber shop, sat there for 2 hours just to fight so Matt would come over and talk to him, just so he could tell him he didn't like the title of our book. He was that triggered. And you know what, I give him props because, you know, we get the trolls on Facebook, but this brother came to great. So he came in just to tell him that, and Matt, instead of just going, like, being defensive about it, he took the time to tell it all with him, to court it all with him, and seek to understand this man's lived experience. He came from his own background of abuse. He was the one being abused by his wife. So when you understand that, yes, it's not all men, it's not all of this, we again come from this place of understanding and empathy and a shared humanity of collectively we will only get better together. We will only get better when we're all in this together. And so I think that's just a better approach, even though it's a lot harder to do, and he's far more patient than I am.
Where'd you get that patience?
Question. No, ask me a question. I don't know where the patience came from. I think, yeah, those words that Wafi has shared, that I've always tried to live my life like that. Seek to understand rather than to be understood. That's one of my core principles, core morals. And so I've seen, like, you know, when you grow up in violence, you grow up in reaction, and it doesn't get you anywhere. Like, the thing I will always be appreciative of growing up in violence, even though I don't push it on anyone, is I can have those hard conversations. I'm not scared to, you know, be assertive or interact with men who are, you know, unregulated. Because I just feel like, oh, poor thing, like, let me connect with the hurting child here. And when you can do that and wear that lens, your humanity expands. You know, your understanding of wanting the world and dreaming for this world to be better, because the seeds that Wafi and I plant in this crop are, you know, we will never eat the fruit from it, but our hope and dream is our children's children will eat the fruit, you know, and they will sit under those trees one day.
Well, for me, She Is Not Your Rehab just spoke to me immediately, and my husband and I sat on our couch wearing our She Is Not Your Rehab t-shirts and did our Instagram post and watched it all unfold. Not always she, it's not always we hear you. And I just want to speak to Once Were Warriors. Mixed feelings there, as our Whanaunga Temuera played Jake Heke. But actually what I see when I see his performance makes me feel sad, because you can't actually perform the way that he did without knowing that story. And Tirina as well. Norita, yeah, it's such an interesting thing, you know. Quite often I come to these events, we've got amazing female speakers. It's all about the empowerment, and we're laughing and we're talking about juicy stuff, and then we come away from that and go, oh, that was fabulous. This is fabulous in a different way, in our healing way and everything that we make it. So we have just 5 minutes now, because we're sticking to Māori time, which is, right on time. So we're going to stop the panel discussion now, but I feel you want to get out some energy and thank these people. Put some applause for them. To want to fill in your evaluation form. So they're already there on your seat. And also you can write down your questions for the panel. That's what we're doing tonight. Slightly different than usual. Could you please write down your questions and also fill in your evaluation form. You've just got 5 minutes to do that. But Catherine, Mary, Chris, Harriet, Liv, Izzy, Amber and Sammy will be ready to collect them. So we also need to check if anyone's got to tear off their questions. Is there anything that is unclear about what saying they can't see your forms. So it's your how to write your pārtai and also your evaluation. Lima minutes I kia tātou we have 5 minutes to do that. Kia ora.
Yeah, I can do a bag. So. I mean, I've heard of this too. You have to go into this one. Yeah. Thinking that it's all women. Oh, it's so hard. Yeah, I think I might have to. At least, like, if this group goes well, I might just do mixed group. You know what I mean? Like, or maybe male only. I think that's probably more safer. Yeah, true. I would too. I wonder. I want to buy one too. Yeah. Oh wow! My birthday? No, I paid for it.
You're so sneaky. Look at you. Sneaking on up and getting your signatures. Take it live. But if I don't do your questions, then I'm not really doing my job. So, where are the books at? Who can tell us? She is doing your rehab as where? Down the back there. That was an audience participation card, by the way. So, okay, Noah, the books, they're not $10 because that's the author's price. You have to stop saying that, Sarah. You shouldn't be saying $10. That is the author's price. But it's wonderful to see you all buying this incredible, important book. And I'm sure these guys will be generous with their time afterwards, but we really do need to get to the pathway because this is your opportunity to ask some questions. So we have been collating some questions. I'll take the first one now. Kia ora hui mai tātou. If we could just come back into our space, our head space for questions. And this first one is to Mina. Your research is with young women. Are there any differences with their experience of coercive control compared to older women? Okay, great question.
Great question. I wish I could answer that because the initial stage of trying to get through ethics and things like that. So maybe ask me in a few years. But we're guessing that things like social media and things like that would be different, and possibly understanding of coercive control might be different as well. But
Also, I guess what's normalised, right?
Yeah.
In different generations. Sarah, you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, a little whakaro. My grandmother passed away a couple of years ago. She was 89, and she was raised in far north. She shared with me. We had much kōrero together. She would share with me just what was acceptable in her generation. And she said to me, I remember one day she said to me, "You girls, you have so much more options. You have so much more open to you. We just didn't have that." So I would say with a cultural shift and what's accepted societal, I mean, I think girls these days, like when I look at my 5-year-old daughter, no. Like, no with no excuses. It's just a no full stop. And I think that slowly our generations of women are getting stronger and louder and bolder and braver. And I think that there's just, that changes things, and what we will and will not accept.
It's such a balance though, isn't it? Because the women get put in the position of just, having to express what's not okay when it should be known. Good Padle here. Why do men who come from privileged backgrounds commit intimate partner violence? I just learned that acronym, IPV. They can afford therapy. They may come from well-off homes.
Well, one of the things that goes along with masculinity is privilege, obviously, in all sorts of ways. But one of the most dangerous elements of that privilege is entitlement. That means entitlement over other people, entitlement to control resources, control finances, control property, and so on. And if you are raised in an environment where that is the norm, then having that threatened or taken away by somebody not following those rules can result in, as I said earlier, use of violence. If you thought that use of violence is a solution to your problems, then that is the case. And also, not just physical violence, but as Peter's researching, coercive control. Like a lot of privileged men are particularly good at manipulating people and closing people down without using the force of violence. So I think that it's a lot to do with those ideas of entitlement that go around masculinity. Briefly.
I mean, I would say that it's not even just in partners, it's in culture in the workplace. I, for one, used to work in the marketing team in a corporate here in Auckland, and I will never forget the day where we had a marketing meeting and my boss, the marketing manager at the time, was speaking, and the CEO came in and basically yelled at her in front of all of us. And at the time, I was, I think, in my early 20s, I remember just thinking, what the hell just happened? And she just put her head down. She was in her 40s at the time, and put her head down and didn't say anything. And he went at her in front of us all, so it was like that shame. He left, and I said, that was so inappropriate. Like, how dare he speak to you like that? I was just absolutely shocked. She said, "Oh, just leave it. He's always like this." I thought, no, I'm not going to leave it. You do not deserve to be treated like this. And actually, I had so much respect in other half of her because she gave so much to the job. We were working for a humanitarian organisation, funnily enough. Anyway, so I actually picked up all the codes I had at early 20s and walked into his office and just said, you know what, that was actually rude and uncalled for, and none of us wanted to witness what you said to her like that. He lost his shit at me, and I was just like, I don't really care what you think, so actually I don't care. But later on, she said to me, thank you for saying something, because no one ever says anything to him. So even if he yelled at me back, even if he didn't really change, the fact that she knew that someone else witnessed it, that actually was just something not okay, that meant something to her. And I just feel that in even workplace culture where that bullying, positions of power occur, we collectively have to stand up and say, no, not on our watch, we're not putting up with that, we're not going to happen.
Nice. Good on you for standing up.
My voice was slightly shaky, but
I've been there too.
Yeah, and I think it calls for those societal sort of understanding of patriarchy as well, I guess. Because I guess if you think about emotion, to very simply say it, men being aggressive in rugby fields or things like that, or aggression is more normalized for men, and anger is more okay for men to express. I think what allows that to happen as well.
But what I heard from you as well, Chris, is that man was protecting his power and privilege, and it's a way it's a form of coercive control, so that everyone knows this is just what he does, but he's the boss, so he can't be questioned. It's another question for you. Can you speak to the issue of hybrid masculinity, the queering of manhood to further the project of dominance? How do we stop men from using allyship as a way to assert more harm? There's a couple of things in there.
We've got some academics in here. Hybrid masculinity. I think there's a couple of things that one of the things is, and maybe I'll answer this in reverse, have you stopped men from using allyship as a way to assert more harm? This is an issue that's been going on for decades. I've recently been reading a whole lot of literature of men being involved in anti-violence struggles since the 1970s. It's an issue that's been going on for a really long time, which is men being involved, talking the talk but not walking the walk. Unfortunately, I'm not sure how to stop that from happening. Sorry. The real difficulty is that there is an element of residual, or not even residual, there's an element of the pedestal effect that happens when men get involved in anti-violence environments or initiatives, which means that men tend to rise more quickly, tend to sometimes be paid more, tend to get more accolades and that sort of thing. And some men feel very comfortable about that, and some men feel a little bit kind of shy and worried a bit. And I think that that's something to really be aware of, is that just because a man is a man who goes into a place doesn't mean that he's like going to be a safe guy. I see a lot of commentary about saying, oh, we need to get more male teachers into schools, but there's no guarantee that having a male teacher means that he's like a good role model. Just by virtue of being a man, I think that's really kind of short-sighted. And then just quickly to the second issue of queer masculinity, I do a long lecture on the contemporary move towards what we might call softer masculinity changes. And I put that question to my students, which is it a case of aesthetic change rather than political change? You can see more men wearing pink shirts and earrings and necklaces and that sort of thing, but you can still wear a pink shirt and be a misogynist and sexist. So I think that, I view the queering of masculinity in that way, in somewhat of a critical lens, although there are obviously frontiers being pushed in the non-binary areas and the rainbow area as well. So I think that's being co-opted a little bit by guys like me in some ways, and so yeah, it's always a push and pull and attention that we need to talk about.
So Harry Styles isn't fixing everything?
No.
Something.
There's no Harry Styles. I don't want to beat up on Harry Styles.
No.
I mean, there's lots of modelling of particular kind of softer masculinity that also allows men to be more successful with women. And so you just put a new costume on and hold, I don't know, the wolf and sheep's clothing.
Yeah.
And again, not saying specifically.
Not Harry Styles.
I mean, I'd love to hear you speak to being a man in this area of advocacy and cordial.
For me, I'm clear on my target of me who I'm targeting as an Indigenous me, because that's my lived experience. You know, having many cousins, brothers, siblings, friends who grew up in this environment, watching their father abuse, you know, their mum. And so for me, we need more men in this space speaking to other men. Like, we need to model it. And so, I mean, I try my best to model it. What we've created in Otuitaki in Christchurch is a group of men and now modeling this in their own sectors, in the construction and in tech. Like, when you get these men on the waka of this kaupapa of men calling each other forward, that minority of group are very hard to target. The privileged, entitled, I mean, all of us are entitled males, don't get me wrong, but the ones that are very hard to resonate with, who for me are white Pākehā men in suits, when they start seeing majority of the men in our community affirming women, not abusing women, that challenges their perspective, like, oh, like what I'm doing is actually not cool. You know, this coercive control. I mean, a lot of men don't even know what coercive control is. You know, they just think because they witnessed that, experienced that with their own fathers, that that's just masculinity.
I mean, we write about it in our book, the chapter She Is Not Yours to Control, but it's basically sometimes we have to explain things in a way that resonates, and unfortunately, this particular group of men that we're experienced with working with, they will hear it better from men like them. That's just the reality of it. So we try to stay in our lane. That's our target audience. We message all of it. We target Indigenous men, so our whakaaro and our kōrero with them is a lot about breaking the cycle, healing your family line, things that resonate, concepts that resonate with these men. I don't personally go speak to a lot of privileged white Pākehā men in those spaces, so we wouldn't just go and cut and paste our concepts and go, right, okay, like, this is for you as well. So I think we have we need different people in the sector to speak to different groups. That's what I think.
But then I was listening to both of you as academics, I see you bridging that, like opening up and using the words that need to be in all the spaces. So, tēnā kora. And this question is very kind of relevant. Oh, it's written down, I didn't make this up. Given Destiny Church recently protested in Auckland against sex education in schools, is Destiny's Church's Man Up messaging doing more harm than good?
Yes.
I mean, diplomatically, I personally do not resonate with any of the messaging. I don't think it's helpful to take a group of already marginalised people that are suffering and move them from one thought process which isn't healthy to another thought process and extract money from them and exploit them. Personally, I don't resonate with that. However, having known some people that have also done the program from their community, and I'm in no way affiliated to their community or belief system, the men themselves have actually told us that it was a good introduction from when they came from gang life and they joined their church and they learned basic things about relationship and, you know, violence and things like that. And so they actually stopped using violence towards their partner or children. I think that's only ever positive. Even if it came from a source that I personally do not agree with, nor do I resonate with. I have looked at some of those men, I've met them personally, and they've said, oh, I started off when I did the Man Up program through this. They may not stay there, but sometimes that's a good starting place for some of these men, just through their own community network. So I don't want to bag anyone doing that work, because we need people, again, in all spaces.
I think for me, one of the main issues with even in the name, the Man Up name, is that, well, it's very. I was looking around and trying to find detail about what they actually do and what the courses are like, and I understand that they're probably quite different. But I think that I get a red flag goes up when I hear that term, man up, or be a man, or be a real man, or that sort of thing, because it's sort of the opposite of what we're trying to do, which is to try to disentangle and deconstruct some of those very rigid ideas about masculinity. So without knowing about the program and what they do, I can't say whether they're, doing that or not, but my assumption would be that we're coming at it from different directions, with different expectations.
And in terms of that diplomacy, I guess when one of the communities I live in, we have a lot of mobsters around, and a lot of them will talk to you about the good things that are happening, and I guess when I look at colonisation and go, part of it is an urge and a desire to be together, to be part of something, and to live together, and that's natural, that's part of us. So I see that a lot of the time that's meeting that need. That's their way of belonging. And that is where you go. Colonisation directly ripped that way of living away from our people, and therefore we find it elsewhere. And the intimidation of what a patch looks like, unless you know who you belong to. So yeah, nui taku aroha. And they also call me fire, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in the fire zone. Unfortunately, our last question, and we have time for, and it's a really important one. The victims of violence, for being lied to and manipulated by an intimate partner, what do you see as acceptable justice, if not prison? How can we serve these women and protect them from further violence and retribution?
I personally see incarceration system completely reworked. I do think that sometimes separation from community into another form of community and actually wrapped around and properly rehabilitated. I do not believe that the incarceration system currently works for anybody. I don't. Evidence proves that, lived experience proves that. So I will never be one that thinks that that's a good option for people. I do think that this will be hugely reworked. I believe that the model can be looked at. Sometimes there's models over in Europe where incarceration looks completely different to what it looks like here. And I believe that, yes, we do need to keep those that are victims of violence and crime safe, but we also need to look at why we are having so many people perpetrating this violence. This isn't one bag egg here. We have statistics that are some of the highest in the developed world. So when we look at that, we have to actually stop and go, what collectively as a society are we doing to create these kinds of, this kind of violence? And so when we stop looking at people individually and going, he did this, she did this, and we start going, what are we doing to create this kind of violence in our communities? I believe the approach would be completely different.
So I think it's a difficult question to answer because each victim will need different things at different points in their lives. I think the best thing is to listen to the victim, validate, listen. Where are you at? Where you need now? I think that's the best way. Incarceration, police, arrest, whatever. It can often, worsen things for them. So I can't say that it's a good thing for them. Sometimes, actually having some work done through community sort of services for men and actually working out things within whānau actually helps them to heal better than probably going through the criminal justice system where they have no control over whatever happens afterwards, after they give that video statement. So I would say listen to the victim would be.
I remember a couple of years ago I was invited to an evaluation of an initiative that was happening in, I believe, Southwark and called Guardian News. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with it. I think that sort of approach is a really good sort of like turning on its head the idea of removing victims and like taking them out of an environment they're familiar with, and instead removing the violent person, taking them out, and then working with them in an environment where they can sort of cool off. So if anyone hasn't heard of that initiative, which seems to be working tremendously well.
What is that one? Safe and Safe Family. It was started by a beautiful man named the same process, but with more the Pacific and Māori kind of framework and workers. So they were quite instrumental in that kind of way of taking out the men that were perpetrating the violence and wrapping around them and keeping women in their homes safe.
Matt, could you speak to us on that question as well? What's acceptable justice?
I think the team here have summed it up, in my opinion, pretty well. Listen to the victims first and foremost, but then also we need to work with these people who are perpetrating violence, or else they'll just find another victim. You know, to keep creating more cycles of abuse. Our children are watching, they're growing up in the same environment. He's now off having, you know, kids to another woman and repeating the same cycle. Like, we need to come together as a community, as a collective, and work with all people.
Do any of you know how many perpetrators of intimate partner violence are actually, I guess, given a formal kind of sentence or actually taken, you know, charged, and how many are just on the DL? You've got an ironic smile on your face, Sarah.
Like minimal, because many of our wahine don't even feel safe to report it to the police. We have, we don't even have enough police to answer all the domestic violence call-outs. Over 50% of policing is mental health and domestic violence. So I used to work on the national domestic violence lines, and we would be overcome with calls all night. For a 9-hour shift, all you heard was the worst of everything in communities all over Aotearoa, and I would say we don't have enough refuges, we don't have enough police to answer all the calls, and that's the ones that are reaching out. That's the ones that are reaching out, that are calling. We try to triage people and help them with whatever we can in that community, and there was just lack of resource and people to help everywhere. One time I got a call, a really serious call from a woman experiencing domestic violence. In fact, she came out on her front lawn holding her small child and said that her husband had been torturing her, and a passerby who was actually a tourist from Denmark, poor fella, he was there on holiday holding a bag of groceries. He googled domestic violence and rung us and didn't even call the police. So we rang the police and alerted them. It took 1 hour 40 minutes for them to get there. And that wasn't because they didn't want to be there, it's because right then at that time the city was overworked and there just wasn't. So he literally stood there with her to protect her while her partner stood there and abused her and threatened to kill her. And that's what we're dealing with. We don't have enough people to deal with the demand that we currently face.
As we wrap up this evening, can I ask you all to speak to a central theme, something so important when we consider the scope of preventing violence against women? One thing. Sorry, Chris, you just sat in the wrong place.
What was it?
Just one thing. So you'd stop listening, you'd go clocked out. One central theme and focus that you believe will lead to the prevention of violence against women.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, sort of not tongue-in-cheek, but yeah, engaging with and overthrowing colonial patriarchy is essentially the end. What should be the goal in all cases? I think that masculinity doesn't serve, well, a lot of the dominant and overbearing norms of masculinity don't serve anyone very well, and the sooner we can unshackle ourselves from those norms, the sooner we'll be able to prevent it.
It's a good answer.
We're going to be very vague and say, listen to victims, whoever perpetrator, whoever it is, to listen to their voice. And that's the essential thing.
My encouragement is that domestic violence is entirely preventable, and it takes us all as a community, as a society, as a country to stand together and create a cultural shift in our society in places that we all frequent all the time. My encouragement to you is, how can you be the safe person in your whānau, in your neighbourhood, in your community, in your workplace? We did it with a little barber shop in Otetahi. Everyone can do it wherever they're at. So I believe it takes us all.
I was going to say that too. My encouragement will be courageous. We need more courageous conversations. wherever you are, especially to my brothers who are in this room. There's not many of us here, but be courageous. Call your brothers, call your boys forward. There is no other way around courageous. It's through. In order to be courageous, you have to be vulnerable. You don't know if you're going to get jabbed in the face, or being courageous, calling your boys forward. You don't know if you're going to get cancelled online. Being courageous, it's vulnerable. To be courageous, you have to be vulnerable. Vulnerable looks like, it feels like sweaty palms. Your tummy is rolling around like a washing machine. That's what vulnerability is. But in order to be courageous, you have to be vulnerable. I try and model what vulnerability looks like. And when you're vulnerable, you give permission for other people to be vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, you then create connection. And when you create connection, you then have permission to have relationship and speak into these men's lives and speak into people's lives. And so, that's my whakapa.
Please bring out all of the sounds and the feelings that will express how you feel about the determination, the heart, the vulnerability, the own lived experiences that were shared tonight by our four panellists, Chris, Nina, Sarah and Matt. Able to sleep tonight, and so all of this emotion and thoughts and feelings, memories, everything that has been brought up for you tonight, we will close it, we will put it in a place where you don't need to have it bother you again tonight if you don't want to, with our incantation. So recognising that this time of our night has finished. Although we might go to the Time Out bookstore down the back of my shoes. No, you already have. Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for everything you've brought. Te whakaeretanga e, te whakaeretanga e. Tēnei te kaupapa kaya. Tēnei te wānanga kaya. Ko te mauri o te kaupapa ka whakamoia, ko te mauri o te wānanga ka whakamoia. Ko a kirunga, ko a kiraro. Turiki whakataha, haumi e, hui e, tai e, mai o te kia ora.